So tonight, fine art demo. Now, fine art, I was looking at the Photographic Awards, the British Photography Awards recently, and the fine art section. And this is not fine art as they describe it. That's mostly nudes. There are no nudes here, you'd be pleased to know. Fine art photography is 101 different million things. It can be straight photography, it can be anything and everything. What I'm looking at is this type of fine art, which is one type of it is where you're adding photographic elements and processes to modify the image. So you're taking a straight image from the camera and then you're putting on other photographs or textures or whatever to make it something different, and to make it more, in my opinion, more like a painting that you would typically see in a sort of old style fine art type of photo or picture, more artistic in that sense. Now, in my case, I usually use this to salvage an image. Okay, so it's because the first image is not good enough, and you'll see that in the first example we do. Now, there are a couple of examples of this. I got interested in this type of imagery when I saw this print. So Linda Haney is the author of this. And she is a fantastic, she's given permission for me to show this and use this. She is an amazing photographer. She wins awards like, you know, most of us don't win awards. She's just incredibly good with her creativity. And I saw this print at Smethwick. I absolutely loved it. I had no idea how you could create this from photographs. It was in a photography exhibition, so I assumed it was made from photographs, which of course it is. I just had no idea how you could do it, but I was hooked. I thought, wow, this is amazing. I just didn't know what to do. Now, Supermain brings in the wonderful Jane Lazenby. And Jane, we've had her a couple of times now at the club, and she also is in this genre. She does these beautiful fine art images, mostly of horses, but of anything and everything as well, and extremely talented. And she came to our club via Zoom, and she showed this image. And this image completely, again, hooked me into it. She not only did she show us how to do this, she actually did a demonstration for us as part of the evening. Not that, frankly, I followed much of it, but I could see that it could be done. But her point was this was an image, the straight version of this image was a complete failure in the sense that it's a horse at liberty, it's got railings, it's got farm buildings in the back. You wouldn't do anything in a competition because it was so messy. But once you isolate the subject, and then you can put in the background whatever you want, in this case, this sort of texture and so on, you've then got a potential competition image. And this image has done extremely well. And I thought, well, I've got lots of images that are pretty rubbish as they come straight out of the camera, but there are elements that are pretty good that can be used if I can obscure the background. So that sort of hooked me into the style. And Jane does, and I know a number of people in the club. I know Jane has, Jane Roby, has done some of her free sort of training sessions she does at Christmas and Easter. And she also has a subscription service, which I subscribe to. And it's really through her that I've learned what I have learned. So just building on this, I mean, this is probably the first fine art image I did in this style, which is the lovely Winnie. And again, you've got that sort of textured background. I'm not the only one who does this. And in fact, really, the queen of fine art is, of course, Jolanta. And I could have picked a dozen of Jolanta's images to show tonight. But I picked on this one because I think it, well, apart from it's stunning, it just, again, sums up that soft, textured, beautiful image. And she's got an amazing ability with this. And in fact, it was going around her exhibition last September, that Chris Mallett came up with the idea that we ought to do a workshop. But it's not just Jolanta and me and others. One other example, a good one, is Roy. Roy did this print. It's my awful photograph, so forgive the photograph, but the actual print was beautiful. Again, you know, an iconic Birmingham building, given the watercolor treatment, given some color toning, love the yellow border, beautiful. And these images do well. You know, they tend to catch the eye of judges. And this was just another great example. They often do work, I think, better as prints than as digitals, but you know, it depends. So tonight comes with a bit of a health warning. Okay. The whole process of doing this is iterative. You just go over and over, and you play and you experiment, and you do something and you have to take it away again, or you adjust it. And it's not a quick process, and it's not formulaic, and there is much sort of trial and error. The way that I do things, as I say here, there are lots of, you know, in Photoshop, there are lots of ways of doing the same thing. If you want to put a shadow in, there are a dozen ways you can make an area darker to create a shadow. So, you know, if you're thinking, oh, well, I wouldn't do it that way, you're probably right, almost certainly right. But it's the way I've got used to doing it. And like everything, it's a habit. And so what I'm showing here is not the way to do it. It's simply my way, or a way of doing it. But it is the way of madness. Now, what I mean by that, of course, is that you end up doing an image and you think, well, you know, well, I could do this, or I could do the other, or I could reduce this, or I could, and you never quite know when to end, where, you know, and often with these images, I will do it and then come back to it and redo it and come back to it and redo it. So it is the way of madness. But with that health warning, shall we get started? So I'll bring the first. So the plan is that I'm going to go through an image layer by layer and show how I have built the picture up from the start position, which is basically a raw photograph, straight out of camera. Now I need to, that's right, I need to, in the nice possible way, get rid of you. There we go. So this is the original. Okay, that's straight out of camera, pretty much. I did crop it, okay, so it's not absolutely straight out of camera, but it's hasn't been played with other than converted from raw. And then after all the work on it, this is what it looks like now. So you can see that it is better, and you can see that it's a completely different style of image. It still has a fair bit of detail in it. If you go in, you can still see a fair bit of detail. So it's not just been completely obscured by textures, but it's certainly different. So I'm going to just show you how I got from A to B. So here we are right at the bottom. Now, again, I'm assuming that most people are comfortable with the concept of layers. Otherwise, this is going to be a bit of a journey. So we're starting at the bottom. I always make a copy. I've done, and I usually try here to write in what I'm using, so that when I come to look for something, I know where it is. So for example, the first thing I tend to do is some cloning. You can see here, there are some buildings. This was taken on a very grey, damp afternoon in Scotland. It's a very well-known wreck just outside Fort William called the Corpac wreck. There's 100 photographs, thousands of photographs of this. It's very photogenic, but it was a rubbish day, a classic overcast grey day in May in last year, I think. Now I've done the cloning. The next thing I do is with a subject like this, you think, right, the first thing that hits you is the ship's way too dark. This is north facing here, so it's dark. You would need to raise this. But if you thought, oh, I'll just do an adjustment layer and I'll just make it brighter. By the time you've made the ship brighter, obviously it's way too bright back. So you know that you've got to treat the different elements differently. The ship has got to be treated differently to the background. So the way that I would do that is I would create a stamp layer. Now a stamp layer is capturing everything you've done to date. So all I've done at the moment is just done a bit of cloning along that shore front. So you do a stamp layer, which is Control, Alt, Shift, and E. Okay, so that gives me my stamp layer. And I would now do a select and mask. So using here, can you see the cursors over select? You go down to select and mask. And now I need to move this out the way. Sorry, that's it, good. So Photoshop does this so brilliantly now. In the last 2 or 3 years, they have made selecting the subject so much easier. You click here next to select subject. You always go to cloud. Cloud gives you a much better result. And you select subject. Now, interesting to see whether, yeah, so there we go. And that's, if when you zoom in, it's given you a pretty good as you can see here, it's given you a pretty good mask of this ship. It's not perfect here. You can see here where it's bad. This has been like eaten into. And I've just given it another click to see whether it improves, and it has. We've now got this searchlight or whatever. The other area I would change, and I'm not going to do it now because life's too short, but you can see here, this hasn't recognized that these actually are windows. And I would normally now go in and I would paint paint these red. I won't do it well. If you obviously using the brush, you would do it better to make this much better mask. But this new select subject has been it's been a real improvement on what it used to be before. Now I would make this, put this mask onto a new layer. So you've got a choice here. You could make it a selection, but I nearly always use new layer with mask. And then it goes, and there you go. That's what I've just done. Okay. Now I'm not going to use that one because actually I've got one I did before, which is better. And the beauty of now having a mask up my sleeve is now I can do an adjustment layer. Brightness, I'll just get this down again. I can now increase the brightness to get that ship up. I can move the mask, and you move the mask by you holding down Alt and then just with your cursor on the mask, just snook it up. It says, do you want to replace the lemon? Obviously you do. And you can see the difference. And suddenly it's brightened up the boat, which is what you're after. Okay. So I'm hoping everybody's reasonably happy with that. So now we've got a better image. It's now a bit brighter. You can see it fits a bit better. It's not quite so flat as it was before. But we now want to add texture. So I'm now going to open up a whole load of texture files. I think before I do that, let me just do a bit of killing. Just to make room up here, otherwise it gets too cluttered. I don't want it to crash either. So I'm going to put all of these up. Well, not that last one, there we go. Okay, and as I use each texture, I'll explain where I got it from and so on. So let me just get this one up. Let me just move this over to the middle. Right, okay. So the first one I'm going to use, it's a real favorite of mine, is this one. It's called an antique card. Now, you can buy textures, but they won't be legitimate for use in Camera Club because obviously every photographic element in your picture has to be yours. We can't have an Eiffel Tower from Generative Fill. So this antique card is exactly what it says on the tin. This is the backside of an old picture that I have of a dead relative. You know how they used to come in those beautiful sort of like cards, and I just flipped it over on its the backside, took a photograph. The original is actually like a yellowy, but I've just made it into a mono. And I think the best textures are the ones that look a bit like this, that are a bit grainy, certainly a bit blotchy, and then you've now got to apply it to your work. So you then press the move tool and you put it on your thing, the image, and then you go up to the one you're working on, drag it down. You always get asked, are you sure you want, because it recognizes that it's a completely different type of image. So you always go, yeah, okay. And then we come down here. Now, just need to put it up there. So the first thing you can see is, well, it doesn't fit. Okay, no problem. Control T, you've now put some sizing on it, and you now just make it fit. If it goes over a bit, it doesn't matter. Let's just make it a little bit smaller. Okay, there it is. Now, obviously, at the moment, because it's a new layer, and if we look up here, it's under normal. So it's just literally normal. And the opacity is 100%. You can't see anything else. We could now play. Now we play. We could reduce the opacity, but of course it starts to, we've lost detail. So I'll be using mostly blending modes. And I think this is a difference between this type of Photoshop and Photoshop Elements, is you can, with this one, go down all the different options and look at one that, you know, floats your boat. Now, if I took multiply, that's a bit heavy. You can and should probably, in most cases, reduce the opacity slightly and maybe the fill, just to give it a little less oomph to it. And then you just go down them and you find one which works for you. Now, I don't really understand how blending modes work other than the visual effect, but there is some science to it. The ones I use most often are overlay or soft light. So I'm going to use soft light on this one. And just think what I did here. Yeah, 57, 54. Now, I think it's added a bit of grain, a bit of interest. It started the ball rolling. It's certainly not there. One that I use a lot is the baking tray. Now, this baking tray is, in fact, my mother's baking tray. And I use it in so many of my images. It's a rubbish photograph taken on her kitchen floor, but it's wonderfully blotchy. And I've taken this baking tray and I've done all sorts of different variations of this. I don't use that actual as a texture, it's too blotchy, but as a base I use it for this one, colored baking tray. So I've taken that baking tray, the one you've just seen, I've slightly applied made it a bit blurry so it's a little less blotchy, and I put a bit of blue on the top because most of our images have a blue sky, don't they, and a brown darker bottom and a sort of taupe or light brown center. So I use this one a lot, and again, apply it, go back up to the image, back down. Yeah, okay, and there it is. And again, Alt T, make it fit. If you wanted to fit, you just hold down the shift and that will just move it like that. Now, this one again, if we look at blending modes on this one, you can see now it really provides a bit of color and a bit of variation. Obviously, some of these are mad, but you can see here you're beginning to get a bit more impact, and that sort of painterly look that I'm trying to go for is there. Now, the soft light works quite well, but you can see, I don't know whether you'll be able to see, but if you look at the actual one I've used, it struck me when I did this, first of all, that the sea is horribly muddy, isn't it? Because it's a brown bottom, it's the brown has come here. But again, you can very easily, on your layer here, go across to your paintbrush. I'll make the size of the brush a bit smaller. That's a bit bigger than that. Hang on. And I'm going to make it blue. And I think, what sort of blue do I want? Let's go for this. A bit darker. I'm just sort of making, and literally I'd say I am making up as I go along with it. And then you can just, now opacity is quite low. So this is the brush here. Opacity is only 10%. We'll push this up a bit, I think. And you can see here, I can add blue in. I think it's a bit too strong, that blue, but you can see how you can add colour just by putting it onto whatever texture you've got. And that's what I've done here. I've used that there. I have here, now this is where I've done a bit of masking. We talked about masking before. And this mask here means that anything that's black is obscured, anything white is what gets revealed. So on this one, I felt, if I just take out, disable that, I felt that that brown middle of this texture was just making this drab again. So I just enable, I just put a mask on this. And let me just show you how I did that. Actually, I disabled it like that. In fact, I delete it. So I now put a mask on. And the way you do it, you think, right, I don't want that texture on the boat. It's just ugly. So you take your brush again, you make it black. It's black down here. And then I'm going to put this up to 100%. And then you can see it just takes away that muddiness. And that's the effect you get by, you don't, you apply a texture. You haven't, in fact, I would argue you should always think, well, actually, does the texture add to what I'm doing? And if it doesn't to every part of it, selectively remove some of it. So I'm just going to go back to where we were. Right. So I liked the look of this one I put, so I'm going to double it. So basically I just did Alt-J and you just repeat it. Okay, so I quite liked the strength, the color that brought. And I did another layer. I think I must have reduced it down. Yes, I didn't have, I've got soft light, opacity 38, so it's not the full. But again, I think, yeah, that's a bit better, a bit darker. Now I've put down here adding to the sea. I think on this one, I must have added a bit of extra blue. Okay. Now the next one is a layer called Duke. I felt at this point it was getting a bit dark, and this is what I'm talking about. You go backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. So I brought in this texture, again, a nice one that I like using, Duke. Now this texture is a complete mixture of loads. I think I started off with sandstone, which we'll be using later, and then I just painted on colors using brushes, and I wanted different colors. I wanted yellows in there. It's called Duke because it was used on a panel I did of a horse called Duke. And I used all sorts of different brushes, powder brushes, to get that mottled look. So again, you move tool back up to fine art, back down. Okay. And again, obviously that doesn't work, does it? So let's reduce the opacity slightly. And now just play with the colors. And I can't remember which one I used in the end. Let's just take that down. I used color dodge. Yeah. Now, Oh, that's right. I'd use this for a reason. If you look at the problem with some of the blending modes is if you go in, and we found this when I was doing the rehearsal with Phil, we looked at this. Color dodge is a great one for, it's a bit more dramatic, but you can see here, if I take it off, you've lost the detail here. It takes out some of the details, made that all bland, and you know how judges love their detail. So actually, I think this one is better off as a soft light than color dodge. So, but I still felt we needed to sort of make it a bit brighter. This is another texture. So exactly the same process. This one's called a grubby tile because that's what it is. I mean, you know, when I getting textures, most of these are iPhone pictures. They're taken when I'm out and about, I see something and I think, oh yeah, that would make a great texture. And what you're looking for is grime. If you find grime, that's what you're after, really. So grubby tile rather. Now this area is called lighting. Now, if I put these back on, it's not actually that strong with this one, but if I click this light, this group is really about lighting. Can you see there was just a subtle change in the lighting? So it just brings a little bit of more drama to it. Now, again, there are lots of ways you can do this. There's dodging and burning. You know, the method I use, which is the one that Jane does, so those who've done her courses will know this, is you put an adjustment layer in, you make it a curves layer, okay, and you make it too dark, deliberately too dark, okay, and then you do Control I to make it black. So in effect, you remove the effect of the adjustment you've made. You go back there, you do another curve layer, do exactly the same thing, except you're making it too light. And again, just go Control I, and I'm on a PC, so I think if it's a Mac, it's Command I. But again, Phil will cover that because he has a Mac. And we're going to put this light so we can remind ourselves what we do. So at the moment, it's just exactly, you know, we've done nothing, have we? It's just exactly as it was because we've masked the effect. But if we now put a brush and we take this right down to about 10, 15 maybe, and then we're going to zoom in. And what you're trying to do with this technique is just bring a bit of life to the image. So you're just trying to highlight where the highlights are without obscuring too much detail, of course. And it just brings a bit of depth, just creates a bit of depth to the image. I mean, this can take hours, so I won't go on, but this is where I like
Jenny,
it.
don't you need a white brush for this?
Don't you need a
white brush?
What sort of brush? Sorry, Chris.
White.
Bright.
White.
No.
Sorry, white.
White. No, I've just got an ordinary brush. And
yeah, don't you need to paint white on, not black? You just got a black brush.
Oh gosh, yes, thank you. Sorry, did you say white? Well, thank you very much. Yes. This is what that was. Thank you. I just couldn't hear. Sorry, Chris. Yes, Chris, of course, is right. Without the white, it won't work. So let's go here. And now it works, thanks to Chris. So you can see here, you can just bring a bit of life into the image. Yeah, let's see whether, and you can do it as much as you want to, but the theory is you're providing a bit of extra dimension to it. So if we take that off, it's subtle, okay, but And you do the same with dark, again, white brush, low opacity. And again, you're just trying to emphasize the dark elements just to give it that bit of depth without making them so dark that you lose too much detail. Now, with this particular image, it doesn't need masses, I don't think. But I use this on a lot of my images, not just this one, but most of my images will have some sort of lightening and darkening. I think most of us have used this type of dodging and burning to give a bit more depth to an image. So if we go back to this one, that's the difference it brings, just a little bit of, but it's subtle, I agree. I then put another texture in. This one is a brown one. I can't see it for the moment. Old Master Brown. So this again is a bit like Duke. It's just literally a load of brush strokes that give it that blotchy feel. And again, I would take it up to the image, back over, okay, and it's there. It's the same principle as with the others. And with this one again, you can see that it's just added a bit of depth to it. And again, you can think to yourself, well, I don't like the look of that. You know, I don't want that one. And that's fine. This is where, as I say, it's the way of madness. And then I felt this was getting a bit too dark, so I brightened it. I thought it would need a bit more blue to it, so I've given it a bit of blue. I just put an adjustment layer in there under color and balance, and I've just up the blue slightly. So it's playing with the image. I put a vignette on. Now, the way that I do a vignette, and there are lots of ways you can take it into camera raw, but I create a blank layer and then take the brush, low opacity, large brush, black, and then just go around it like this, just to give it a bit of, okay, so that's how I do a vignette, but there are lots of ways of doing a vignette. I've done another Duke layer. I can't remember why now. I think I just wanted to be a bit more blue, and so, but again, the same principle. But I think this is color dodge. That's right. And I've taken off, as you can see here in the mask, because I noticed we were losing the detail there. So if I disable that layer mask, you can suddenly see we've lost some detail. Makes it just a bit more. Now birds. This isn't meant to be a composite, but I could never resist putting birds in. So, I mean, I could do generative fill, couldn't I suppose, on this one, but I haven't. These are some birds that I took when I was in Norfolk earlier this year, and I've just popped them in. Now I can show you how I do that, but I won't do that right now. But if you're interested, I can show you how I've got those birds out of another image and brought them in. But I can do that later if people want to see how that's done. But it just fills this blank up in the right-hand corner, and it balances out what I think is a picture that's quite weighted to the left. Now the mist, love a bit of mist. This is quite straightforward and easy to do. Another layer goes in. Change the brush to white. Now I have quite a few cloud brushes, which I have made. What's a better one? That's the better one. And low opacity, and then you just no, why is that not working? Let's try another cloud brush. Oh, that's the better one, sorry. I just get why. Let's just Ah. Okay, and then you just, the cloud here, you can see just adds a bit of, I'll probably make this a bit smaller. And what I might do is just change the brush settings, which are over here, and make them jitter so they don't all look uniform. Now we can talk about jittering brushes and making brushes if you want me to, but you can see that's quite effective. I think a little bit of mist. You don't obviously want the mist on the boat because you're trying to give the impression of mist in the background. So that's why I've put in our mask again on this one here. This is the one I've done. I've put the mask over the boat and also the foreground, because again, you probably wouldn't have mist in the foreground. If this were a real picture, you'd be seeing mist in the distance and not in the foreground. And then what else have I done? Again, I felt we could play with a bit of brightness. And this is where you as I say, it's a way of madness. You just play with it until you feel it's the best image you can have. I've cropped the top. It's not cropped, I'm sorry, I've cloned the top. I felt the top right-hand corner was a bit bright. The aerial, definitely way too bright, so that's been darkened. And then the last texture I've put on, I think, is sandstone. Sandstone is it's a great texture. It is just, as it says on the tin, it's just sandstone. I just show it to you. There it is. That's it. I mean, I think it was from a building, National Trust building. I don't know. It's just sandstone. And I love it because it just provides that grain, as you can see. I think it's made it a bit dark because obviously it brings across color. I've dropped the saturation slightly. I've brightened it slightly, just to help it out. So, and then the last thing you can consider doing, which I've done here, is you can add things like rain. This is rain, which I love. I think that gives a nice, it sets the scene because it was a pretty grey day. So there's loads of things you can do. And so there we have it. That's interesting because the one that I have just made, which is this one, is not the one I've played with it, and we've got there with it. So if Phil, if you want to sort of open up the discussion, and if you've got questions, or want to go over anything again, I'm happy to do that.
Sure. Thanks ever so much, Jenny. That's fascinating. It's always really informative when you watch somebody else working in Photoshop. I always think to myself, I know my way around it, and then always see something different and something new. So thank you for that. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask Jenny about the process?
Yes. All of your layers you are all JPEGs. I've saved some and they're all in RAW, but I wouldn't lose anything if I change them all to JPEG. Is that right?
Yeah. So you're right. All my textures are JPEGs, and they're often poor quality. To say they're iPhone pictures, they don't need to be good quality because they're just adding. Actually, if you look at sandstone, the last one I put on, it's actually adding grain. Now, it may not be that you like the looking of the grain. I get that. It's not everybody's taste. But for the style I'm going for, the quality doesn't matter.
Right.
Whereas obviously the boat was rubbish, and soft and everything else, then it would matter. But for the purpose of that, so JPEGs, yeah. And
thank you.
John, I've got a texture that I lay on in my next demo, which is a raw file, and it will allow you to tinker around with it in raw before it overlays it in either Photoshop or Elements. I'll show you that in a bit.
Yeah.
Jenny?
I think it's made, yeah,
Are
yeah.
you able to do
Sorry.
that with JPEGs as well, Phil?
Yes, yeah, you can tinker around with them first.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry,
Jenny,
Dave, did you have a
sorry.
question?
Yeah, all it was, Jenny, you had one layer that you duplicated.
Yeah,
I noticed the opacity was 34%.
yeah.
Rather than duplicate it, could you not have increased the opacity
Yeah,
to
you're
68%?
absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Okay.
This is what I mean. There are multiple ways of getting to where, and I've pretty much stuck to everything when I've replicated things, and yet the image, that's the image we've played with today, but that's the image that I played with when I did it yesterday. So it's quite different, and I don't know which I prefer. I've no idea. So you're right. And that's why I love layers, because you can take things out, tweak, and refine it as you go. But you're absolutely right. And you can take things like, so, you know, you could take this layer, Duke. I don't know that it's going to make much difference, because it's, in fact, when you do go through it, sometimes you look at these and think, well, I might as well take it out because it makes no difference at all. But, you know, you could take this base sandstone and you could actually adjust it as an image and make it, I don't know, much darker. And sometimes it makes a huge difference. No, it's not making a huge difference here, but there are so many options to making things different and playing with it. And sometimes the best images I've made are pure accidents. You know, I've just put something in and I thought, oh yeah, that works really well.
Thank you.
Jenny, at one point you made a stamp layer. Was that sort of to collate, say,
Yeah.
the changes you've made so far in
Yeah.
one new
Yeah.
layer? What was the shortcut key for creating?
Yeah, so I have it on a post-it note. I'm stuck on my computer because I always forget. So it's Control Alt Shift E.
Phil,
Yeah.
this is Chris. It's purely a merge visible, basically, that
Oh,
she's
is it?
done with the Alt key held down. So if you go to the top of your stack,
Yeah.
just go into the merge visible and hold the Alt key and press it. It will do the stamp.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That's
Like that. Is that right?
has that got rid of the
That's
other?
merge, yeah, but it's
Your technique left the other layers, didn't it?
yeah.
If you hold the Alt key down, it will maintain all the layers.
Oh, right. It just introduces.
Okay, right, okay. As I say, I don't use it very often because to some extent, you want the layers to be available to you to then remove them or play with them to get with where you want to go. But it's great when you're trying to get, as I was here, a mask on. If you wanted to do a mask like then, you have to do a stamp layer.
Right.
But yeah. So
So the stamp layer is you merge the layers.
you're merging all the layers. So like if I did so that's where we've got to. Okay. I would just that layer. Let's put the rain on. I love the rain. And then here you're just pressing Control Alt Shift E. And there it's captured everything, but you haven't lost your layers. Now, Chris is saying you can do that by clicking and doing merge, a merge visible.
Hold the Alt key. Hold the Alt key though when you do it.
Yeah. Okay, let's try that then. Let's take that out. Because merge visible. Yeah, yeah. Perfect. So just to sort of declutter a bit, if you don't mind. Yeah, so merge visible with Alt will give you the same thing, but the keyboard shortcut is the ones I've just mentioned. Yeah. Okay.
Jenny, could I just say, it seems
Yeah.
that when you added your sandstone layer, you seem to have lost the mist that you put in.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. It
I
is,
think
yeah. I
you
mean,
can presumably drag that back up the stack from the
you
stack.
can, yeah. In fact, let's just look at
Higher
that.
up.
You are right. It's surprising how things that you, yeah, the mist has gone, isn't it? You're quite right. So you're right. You can go back to my miss, which is where the benefit of labeling things help. Well, let's just move it for the moment.
Just move it up the stack.
Up we go. Come on. There we go. Pop it to the top of the stack. It's not making a big difference, is it? A bit, yeah.
A bit, yeah.
It's a very good point.
A bit, yeah.
Makes it a bit. And of course, every time you put something else on it, it will change. Yeah. You need to make sure you haven't lost the good bits and that you liked originally. But yeah. Okay. So
when are you going to show? Well, could you show us how you put the birds in? Because again, there's probably many different techniques, and just learning how you do it.
Okay. So let me find my birds. 2023. So, yeah. So, just trying to get rid of that. So, this is, let's just go down here. So, this is my picture of the birds taken on. It's been heavily cropped in. Okay, so the original picture has more sea in it for a start, but this is the skein of geese that I had on this beach. So what I've done, I hope I get this right. Back to my good old friend, select and mask. And again, we get this. We go to select subject, always choose cloud. And now go select subject. And it's having a think. Now, this is a good example, actually. It's not done it perfectly. You can see we've got a few birds missing. So I'm going to try and capture those. See whether it'll work. All right, let's try this. So it's done this now. Let's see whether this one works. Okay, it might be getting a bit of a hissy fit. Yes. So it will eventually think about it and then provide me with the option of individually capturing these birds. And now, okay, if I'm being really picky, Mike, I would go in and put some red round because it's got some white sky, but life's too short. Okay. Now with this one, I'm going to do a selection. Okay, so now here, I now have these birds selected. So here they are. There they are. They've now been selected. They're now able to be moved. Now, when you move a selection like this, and it took me yonks to work this out, you have to actually have the little cursor thing on the thing you're trying to move, as opposed to over here. So put it over there, and you can see them literally flying off onto the wreck, back down here, and there they are. Obviously, they're at the top of the stack. You want to make them bigger. You do Control T. There they are. Let's just put them over here. Because they are, as you can see, we've caught the white, so we would need to refine the mask. We'd want to reduce the opacity because, you know, they are not going to be black. That's a bit too much. But that's how you do it. As I say, I must have spent some time getting this mask much better because you've got a few white spots that obviously don't make it as realistic, but that's how you do it. Does that help, Mike?
Yes, thanks very much. Yeah. I shall go back to the recording and look at it in more detail.
Yeah, I think it's worth playing with select and mask, because it's absolutely a game changer for me. Because so much of my photography, because I don't take photographs particularly well straight out of camera, I need to make individual adjustments as opposed to global. You know, I need to make this item brighter, but not that item. So being able to select it and then play with just the lighting on that, or whatever, the color or whatever, has made a big difference.
Well, thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Jenny. Is there another question now?
Sorry, Phil.
Is there another question?
I just say there that you can only take what's there, and if the lighting isn't perfect, you can't get it straight out of camera. You do need to play with it.
Yeah.
Well, you do. I mean, if we look at the original, it's hellishly different. And at the end of the day, this particular, with we've all been in Scotland on wet days, and this isn't
many of them.
It's because it's north facing this side. I'm looking due east here. It's a difficult image to take and not then have to play with it. And so
it's a very dramatic transformation, isn't it? It really is.
Yeah.
Jenny, if you'd like,
if
you'd like to take a little break now, I'll. Can I demonstrate?
Yes,
how you can do some of these things in Photoshop Elements.
Absolutely.
And then I know you should be able to see my Photoshop Elements screen now. And pretty much I'll try and demonstrate how you can achieve the same sorts of things in Elements. You'll notice my version of Elements is a little bit old. It's 2021, and it will have much more sophisticated select and mask facilities in the latest version. But let me open up my file first of all. I'm going to open up in Camera Raw this picture of Gloucester Docks, which is a great place to visit, actually, if it's only about an hour away, an hour and 15 minutes. And there's plenty of things to photograph there, and there's loads of places to go have a bite to eat or a drink. And there's some really nice shops there as well. If you've got family with you, you don't want to bore stiff when you're photographing 300 pictures of the same thing. These are all the old warehouses that they've sort of changed the use of. There's a museum there, and these are flats and things. It's a really interesting place to go. But I'll start off in RAW, and I tend in RAW really just to tinker around with a few things, like if there's any highlights in the picture. There's nothing much there. There's quite a deep shadow area down the middle there, so I'll probably brighten that shadow a bit. But it's worth having a look what Auto does. I'm just going to click Auto, and that sort of brightens the whole thing up for me quite nicely. So I'm going to stick with that. I might just brighten the shadows a little bit for the middle there. And I'm going to load that into Photoshop Elements now. Ultimately, I'm going to try and make this picture look old. I'm going to oldify it. Is that a word even? Oldify? No, probably not.
Age it.
Age it, yeah. So eventually I'm going to turn it into a monochrome, which there's loads of different ways of doing it. As Jenny mentioned, there's not a right way to do it. There's the way you use. One way is in the RAW converter. You can turn it to black and white. And for me, that gives a very sort of bunch of grey scales and not really punchy enough. So it's not really the one I'm going to use, but that's a possible. But I'm not going to use it on this occasion. So that's my starting point, a fairly dull picture with nothing much going on, but I'm going to oldify it. So let's take it into Photoshop Elements. It's a bit slow because I'm running through Zoom. Just a couple of things I'm going to do to tidy it up first. These buildings are leaning in a bit. I've got a bit of perspective lean there, so I'm just going to move the menu, which is in the way. Right. I'm just going to go to Image and Transform, and there's an option perspective in Photoshop Elements, which works rather well, I find. Click on perspective, and you can see you've got some anchors in each of the corners in the middle of each side. I'm just going to take the anchor on the top right and drag it to the right until that wall looks as straight as I can get it. That'll do. I'm a bit worried I've overdone that side there, but we can correct that. So I'll just press the tick to accept that version of it. So that's straightened that wall up a bit. I tend to have these rulers switched on when I'm working at Photoshop or Elements, just to check the horizontals and verticals. So I'm just going to bring that ruler over to there, and I can see I've overdone that wall a little bit. So I'm going to push that one back a bit using Image and Transform again. You'll notice there's one called Skew, which allows you just to push it back a little bit, just to make it vertical again. That's close enough. Now I'll get rid of I need that selection thing. Well, let's apply that first. I just need to get rid of that ruler. Just drag it back into the rulers bit. I always use those for sort of checking things are horizontal and vertical. You know how the judges love a horizontal horizon. It's always worth checking using those rulers. Okay, I'm going to crop it before I do anything else. I don't really like this bar in the corner here, so I'm going to get rid of that. Use the crop tool. There we go. It's cropped a bit too much of the right as well there, so I'll take that back to that edge. But I can crop. Let's just uncrop that down to the bottom so that I like it that that edge of the harbour there goes right into the corner. And I've lost a bit on the top as well, haven't I? Okay, so that's my crop. I like to keep these few buildings on the side to sort of hold in the right-hand side a bit. Okay, that red life-saving thing is really dominant, but eventually I'm going to turn it to monochrome anyway, so I'm going to leave that as it is. And that's my starting point for the picture, I think. Okay. One nice feature of Photoshop Elements is the dehaze function. In Enhance and Haze Removal, you can remove a haze, or you can actually add one as well. So haze reduction, worth playing around with that slider. That's in RAW as well, isn't it, in Photoshop? And that gives a bit more punch in the sky. Okay, so I've got my starting point now. So before I start messing about with anything else, I'm going to duplicate that layer. Just to save time, I won't bother renaming them, but I'm going to start laying on some different textured layers now. The first one I'm going to use, it's a slightly different way of applying a layer in Photoshop Elements. If you just drag and drop it onto it, it doesn't create a layer automatically. What you have to do is open another file. So I'm going to open my file called Rust. I haven't even renamed it. Okay, that's a raw file, so it gives me the chance to make some changes in raw. And what this actually is this great big cone thing, this obelisk. It's at Gloucester Docks that they've just let go rusty. But I wanted this texture because I wanted the photograph to look as if it was an old photograph with scratches on it. And this looks like the ideal sort of texture for me. So you can see I've bumped up the clarity a bit, so you can make some changes to the texture. before you load it in, as it's a raw file. So I'm going to click on Open now, and that takes it into Photoshop Elements, but you'll see it opens it as another file. Now, the Elements system works slightly differently. To see these files and make an overlay layer of them, what you have to do is have a look in the photo bin, which is at the bottom, obscured by that menu. Let's just see if it'll. Right, I've got it now by shrinking the window down. Down in the bottom left-hand corner, there's a photo bin. You click on photo bin, you see the two images that you've opened. So it works as a slightly different way in Photoshop, but what you've got to do is select the picture of Gloucester Docks. So you can see that in the main window. And then what you do is you pick up the texture layer, which is the rusty one, and drag and drop to the center of that screen. And it's working very hard, but you can see it creates a layer over the top. So I'm just going to zoom out a bit. And you can see it hasn't quite sized it to the right size. So same as Photoshop, you use transform and free transform, which is Control T or Command T on the Mac. And you can just stretch that so the overlay fills entirely the picture. Okay, so we've got 2 layers, or 3 layers, but one's a duplicate. And as Jenny suggested, I'm just going to reduce the opacity of that textured layer just to reveal what's going on behind it. And that's using the normal blending mode, which is really just replacing the layer. I've just sort of reduced the opacity a bit. Again, you've got all the same sorts of blending modes in Elements, but unfortunately, they don't preview as you go down the list. And to be honest, you could write a book about blending modes, how the darker ones will combine the color numbers of corresponding pixels onto layers to darken the picture. But the ones I've tended to use have been the same ones that Jenny's been talking about, the overlay mode, and also soft light. And the other one I sometimes use is linear light, which is rather a harsh effect. But of course, all you need to do is move the opacity of it down a bit. I think on this occasion, overlay looked about the best one, and quite a strong opacity there. And what I want to do is just zoom in and show it's giving the sort of effect I'm looking for, which is really scratches on the picture. But what I don't want, scratches really all over it like that on the sky. That's kind of spoiling the sky a bit for me. So I'm just going to zoom out. Fit on the screen is best. And what I'm going to do is use a mask to get rid of that texture in the sky. Now, the simple way of doing it is select the layer with the rust on, go up to Add Layer Mask, and you've got a white layer mask at the moment. So white means that effect is applied to every pixel. But if you want to block the effect on a particular pixel, all you do is you paint it over in black. So black for block. So choose the paintbrush, and then I've got rather too big a brush there. But what I'm going to do is reduce the size of that brush. Let's just try and reduce the size of that brush again. It's not working. Use that. Usually you can increase and decrease the size of the brush with the square brackets key, but that's not working at the moment. It's probably intercepted by zoom. So what you do is you paint over in black the bits you don't want that effect to be applied to, and reveal the sky behind it. And you can see in my mask there, the black bits are where it's blocked, and the rusty overlay is over the white bits. If you want it really accurate, you can get it really accurate because you can just delete that layer then. And what I can do is, before I apply the mask, if I select the sky, now I've got an old version of Photoshop here, so I think the new version has actually an option, select sky. But what I do is just increase my brush a little bit, not with the square brackets, but and what I'll do is I'll just select the sky. Oh, sorry, I'm on the wrong layer, so I'm just going to we'll always do that. So I'm on the rust layer at the moment. Go to the layer below it. These square brackets are working now. What I'll do is I'll select the sky. I'm not going to do it very accurately, but I've done it pretty well. So with the sky selected, you can click the mask, add layer mask. I've done it to the wrong one. So I'll undo that. Now I want a layer mask on the rust layer. So I've got it selected still. Click layer mask, and you can see I've got an accurate mask now, but it's done the wrong way round. I've blocked it on the ground and allowed it on the white. So I'll just undo that. Any suggestions how to get around that?
Inverse.
Yeah, inverse. So you go to select an inverse. As Jenny said, it's a matter of trial and error, isn't it, really? You just work your way through it, making mistakes, but correcting them. So I'm now going to put that layer mask on for everything but the sky. And that's what I wanted. So my sky layer hasn't been affected by the rust, but the ground has. Okay. And now I'm going to add another layer for the sky and give a bit of texture to the sky as well. So let's open up another layer. This again, photographed at Gloucester Docks, this really sort of grungy side of the dock. People look at you in strange ways when you see you photographing things like this and think, what's he photographing that for? And again, it's opened it as another file. I need to have a look in the photo bin, bottom left, to see all my files. Click on the Gloucester Docks picture and then do the same, drag and drop the grungy picture into the center. It's not happy to do it at the moment. Oh, that's done it. You can see in the stack over on the right, it's dropped it in the wrong place because I was highlighting this layer. That's easily corrected. I can just move it up a bit. So that's the top layer of my stack now. And again, I want to extend it so that it fills the whole screen. So Control T or image, transform, and free transform is the other way of doing it. You just drag. I've got this little coffee bean thing that's really white there, so I'm going to drag it to get rid of that a bit. Now, Jenny mentioned she likes really soft, blurred backgrounds like this, overlays, and this is really quite harsh at the moment, but if you want it a bit more blurred, you can just go to filter and use one of the blur options, Gaussian blur or something like that. You can't do it because I haven't made the layer editable. I need to make that a simple layer, don't I? Just a filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and then have a look how much Gaussian blur you want to put in there. Quite a bit. More than that, really. Okay, so that's made it a bit more blurred. I'm just drag menus out of the way here to see what I'm doing. Once again, that's the normal layer at the moment. So that's the top layer. The opacity is 100%. You can tone the opacity down a bit so you can start to see what the effect is. I certainly don't want the effect over the main foreground of the picture. So what I'm going to do is that same sort of thing again, where I go to background layer, highlight the sky, and this time that sky is going to become my mask. So I click on the new layer, apply the mask. So I've then got that on the top layer, and you can adjust it down a bit. It's a bit harsh, isn't it? I'll increase it because it looks a bit, although it looks a bit harsh, once I stick the monochrome layer on it, it'll look okay, I think. It's like Jenny said, every time I've done this, I end up with a different picture, slightly different picture. And if I kept them all, I'd probably choose the one I like best. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is add a border to make it look like an old photograph. And here's one. This is real Blue Peter stuff. Here's one I did earlier. This border I've created just by painting in Photoshop. It's a rectangle. I've sort of made the edge a bit grungy and messy and grey in the middle with a black border. And that's the one I'm going to add. Click on Photo Bin. And then make sure you've done the same thing. Select the Gloucester Docks picture and pick up this border and plonk it over the top. Need to just fill the screen with it. Quite important on this one to get it precisely into the corners. It's got this black border. Okay, and as the blending mode is normal, it obliterates it completely. I'm going to try different blending modes. Darken, multiply, linear burn. No, just have to try them really until you get something you like. I think what I'm going to do is use normal. And what I'm going to do is get rid of that middle bit. And to do that, I'll just supply that. I'll just draw a square or even a rectangle. I'll feather the edge, select, feather by quite a lot. I'll try it by, say, 60. You see, I haven't really got much of a curve in the corner there, so I'll do it a bit more. Select, feather, 80. And then I'll apply that. I'll probably need to inverse that first. Select, inverse, and then apply that as the mask. And that allows my border to appear quite strong, but the picture behind it is peeking through. So nearly there. Oh, let's have some birds in there. Why not? I won't use AI birds, but I did take loads of birds when I was sitting on the seafront at Weston recently. So there's a whole collection of them. There they are. Do the same. Photo bin, select the docks, and drag the birds over. I've got them behind that top layer, look, so I just need to drag them to the top. I can't even see where they've gone. So I'm going to have to use Control-T to expand them, make them a bit bigger. Fill that little area there.
So you got condors, haven't you?
That's seagulls, that's right. My final step to make it look really old is to make it monochrome. Now, a number of ways of doing this. I know the latest versions have got, you know, more sophisticated ways of turning it to monochrome. Convert to black and white. That's not the way I'm going to do it anyway. What I'm going to do to convert it to monochrome, I like to use an adjustment layer. So create a fill or adjustment layer over the top. And I think there's one in the latest version which is actually black and white. But I'm going to use hue and saturation. It's a really crude way of doing it, I suspect, but it does give you a good effect. If you just move the saturation down, the channel master, it just takes all the color out of it. And you get this black and white image, which, you know, it's good enough. But if you want something a bit more stylish, maybe, and colorize it, you've got this selection of different colors that you can choose, and you can get it down to a sort of sepia tone. That's more sepia, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then change the saturation of it, the lightness as well. So it's starting to look like the old picture I was looking for. And that's it. I've finished. I think that how many layers have we ended up with there? They're the same. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm sure we could have done a lot more with it, but certainly a big improvement over my initial photograph, which was rather dull. But that's how you do it in Photoshop Elements, and the difference really being the use of the photo bin at the bottom, and the way you drag your layers over the base layer or the background. Okay, any questions about that? I'll stop sharing my screen if there are no questions, but if anybody wants to ask anything. I'm not the expert in using elements, but just sort of find ways of doing the same sort of things as I usually do in Photoshop.
I'll canter through literally a pun there, this one much quicker. Okay, so this is the original. Okay, it's not a great image. It was a bright sunny day, loads of contrast. I don't know that I'd ever use it for a competition because it's just too compromised by the lighting, but I just wanted to play with it, and I thought it'd be quite fun to do it for this session. So made it from a daylight, you know, unadulterated green, isn't it, into something much more mysterious and much more attractive, I think, than the others. So how did I get there? Let's just take all these layers off. So again, lots more layers than Phil. I'm obviously into lots of layers. So this is the start image. So just again, like Phil did, tidying up, you know, when you get a base image, and you need to choose a good base image. I mean, this isn't a particularly good base image because it's too bright, it's too contrasty, but I think it's always fun to play with. Took out the post. I made it less green simply by reducing the yellow. Okay. I did the mask, so I did another stamp layer here, and wanted to get a mask. Oops. Are we all still there?
Yeah.
Great, good. Sorry, I keep getting this message from Zoom to say it's crashed, and so I could be talking to nobody. So this is the mask. You can see here the mask. I did it exactly in the same way up to select and mask, and it does a very good job these days of doing that. I took out some of the brightness here because I want to make it a night image. That's the plan. Now I did put a castle in. I can never resist a castle, but I'm going to leave the castle out for the moment. But then I wanted to make it very dark, so I dropped so I put an adjustment layer in, brightness and darkness, and then made it dark. And used the mask to do that, to get it to be dark. So again, it's this power of having a mask that you can then play with. As I say, I'm going to forget the castle for the moment. Say I dropped it. Now here I want some mist. Love mist, my favorite thing. So again, how I did that was put a new layer in, back to my brush, making it white. I don't quite know why it's not switching over. There we go. Here's my cloud layer, cloud 12. And then just putting on here low opacity, and then I'm going to make it into a jittery one. So you've got these brush shapes, jitter size. Jitter means it will change shape. You see it moves around rather than a standard brush. Obviously that's too much opacity there. Let's reduce the opacity and then put lots of mist in. Now, of course, I don't want the mist to go over the horse, because if I start to obscure her, that's not a good look. So I want to use the mask like Phil did, with making sure that his texture didn't go over the sky, just using the mask, that all taking up the mask from the bottom. And again, you can do the mist like this, and it's not going on the girl. Oops, sorry. Needs to go on the actual image. There we go. And you start to create mist and mystery. So I've done that there, lots of it there. Bit more. Dave made the point about, could you just not increase the opacity of a texture rather than have 2 or 3 layers? But the beauty of having multiple layers is you can then play, you can add extra sort of, is that too much, too little, or have another layer? And it just builds it up. And sometimes you think, I've done it too much. I've just increased the exposure on the girl. And again, that's an adjustment layer here with exposure. I've put a curves layer on, like I described before, just to reduce the darkness along the bottom.
Jenny, were you duplicating the layers to get greater density of smoke? So it's the same layer on top of another one?
It is. It's a greater density, but then greater ability to sort of fade it away. So you think, oh, I want a bit more. Or do I want a bit more? It just gives you, just to fine tune it.
Yeah.
But, you could just take the first one and repeat it, by doing Alt-J. But that makes it too much, in my opinion. So it's just literally playing with it. I suppose I go perhaps for too many layers, John, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
Too complicated.
I've got a photograph where there's taken one recently with this smoke up in.
Yeah.
I think I could increase it if I mask out the subject and duplicate that.
I think it
layer.
needs, you're right, you do need to mask her, like I've got here, the mask, you know,
Yeah.
she's not covered with smoke. That makes a big difference. If I took out that, if I disabled that, you know, suddenly she becomes, I mean, it gives another impression of the image. Some people may prefer that, you know, it's what you like.
Did you duplicate it, or you had another one which gave it an intense layer?
Yes. So what I've done here is I've got what I would call quite a thick layer of, and then I thought, oh, I could do with a bit more. But rather than just add it to the first one, I've made a second layer.
Right. Yes.
Just so that I can then think, oh no, it's too much. I'll take it out. So it's just fine tuning it.
Yeah.
I did say it's a way of madness, John. Okay. When do you stop? I'm not sure I know really. So I've increased the exposure on the girl slightly. I've done this lighting that I showed before, using these curves adjustments. I wanted to make the base darker, and then give her a bit more light to the thing. I wanted to add some moonlight because the light's coming down on her here. So you need to think, well, why is it coming down? Well, there must be moon or something, just to provide some sort of direction. I thought we could do with a bit more mist. So, and then I've taken out, I don't know what that does. I think that must, oh yeah, there's a bit of green. If you look at the horse's forelock here, it's gone very green with all the adjustments I've made. So I have just reduced the saturation there to make it, you know, in fact, in the end, I thought, oh no, it's not good enough. I need a new forelock. So I've actually added in a new forelock, not particularly effectively, because you can see here it's not very good, but I would need to improve that. So I think if I were refining this, I'd add a mask, I'd get my brush, I'd get a normal brush. Let's try and get a normal brush. So because I played with the jitter, there we go. So this is a normal brush, and as you can see here, adding in a different color forelock, I have, unfortunately, it's gone a bit ugly here, so I've just taken that out there. But the forelock is now a bit more attractive than it was before. So yeah, I've just brought a bit more light to it. And then up here, I've done a whole load of textures. It doesn't make a massive difference, but again, again, I won't show exactly how I did the textures. I showed it before. If somebody wants me to show it again, I can, of course, but I've used cream clouds, grubby tile, the baking tray, and sandstone, just to give, I put them in a group so you can see the effect. Again, it's not dramatic, but it just provides a bit of something, I think, a bit of improvement. Now, what I have done here is done a color lookup. Now, what this is if you would do a stamp layer, so that's what we talked about before. You know, Chris was saying you can do it two ways. The way you can do it is do this merge visible, which I never knew, so I'm grateful for somebody telling me how to do this. And you press Alt at the same time. What I'm going to do is the way I've always done it, because it's in my head, is the Control Alt Shift E. There's the stamp layer, and then you do a color lookup. Now this is always quite fun to play with. So you go, I don't know that they do this in Photoshop Elements, somebody can tell me, but if you go into Image and Adjustments and you go down to color lookup, you've got a whole load of options. Now, a bit like Photoshop Elements, you can't do previews. So as I run down, you can see nothing happens. I think for this one, I've used night from day. Yeah, that's right. So you can, but you can use others. I mean, this is candlelight. Okay. And these are fab. They do take out detail. You have to be a bit careful that you don't lose more than you gain, but you can see the different styles that you end up with. I'll stick with night from day for the moment. Obviously, that's way too blue, but you obviously can reduce the opacity. And you've got this, different coloration. I'm trying to make it a night picture. So color lookups are good. They do, I think I might just increase that a bit, actually.
Where did you find color lookup, Jenny?
Yeah, so it's up under image. Under adjustments, go down. There it is.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And it just provides color. It's a bit like a preset, which you can get in Camera Raw, but it's there, and it's fun to play with. But you need to have a stamp layer to play, and you just have to go through them individually to find one that you like. Okay, so I'll just get rid of that for the moment. So, and then I've decided to make it. Oh, that's right. I was a bit concerned. She's quite dark around her midriff. Again, we've got a very contrasty day, so I've lightened that. I've also thought the horse was a bit dark on his chest and on his back leg, so I have lightened those using selective color. I have taken out blacks. I've made them. Actually, I don't know what I have done, actually. Oh, that's right. I took the neutral, because obviously he's grey, the neutral, and I've reduced the black. You can see how you can improve the horse's shadows. I mean, again, there are other ways of doing that. You could have done that in Camera Raw, but I just chose to do it in there. And there we have it. So this is quite, reasonably straightforward fine art. Again, I could add in other textures. I mean, there's a whole bunch here, but you can carry on playing with the same ones. I did put a castle in for the fun of it over here, just to provide something up in that boring left-hand corner. So there we go. It's interesting. This is the one I did before, is quite purple. So this one I prefer. The one we've just played with, I prefer, because the one that I'd done, I was checking it through over the weekend, is quite purpley. You can see the horse is quite
magenta.
Yeah, it is magenta. So this is where coming back to it a second time and thinking, what can I do different? And I prefer the one we've done tonight than I did the one on Saturday or whatever. So yeah, okay. Shall I stop sharing any question? Well, before I stop sharing, anything on that you wanted to go over again, or anything that didn't make sense?